checking in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, I got the unfortunate news late last night from American Airlines that my leg to get me to Dallas had been delayed in such a way that I couldn't make the screening. And can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I see someone. I think someone's right in front of the camera.
Get away.
No problem. But anyway, I was very honored to be asked to submit the film for this Films of Remembrance program when Kenji reached out, and was even more excited whenever he said that our film had been selected. And San Francisco holds a special place in my heart. Right out of college, I lived in San Francisco for a year and started my career in advertising before learning that I wanted to get into film. And I first started that process at the Academy of Art College, which now I understand is the Academy of Art University. And yeah, I just loved my time in San Francisco, and then moved to Los Angeles and have worked for, I guess, 15 plus years now in film. But do you guys have any questions for me?
I actually had one that I wanted to kind of start off with, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We were, we were wondering, the Film of Remembrance Committee was wondering how you came across the story, or how you chose, or why you chose to tell this story. What spoke out to you?
Sure. Absolutely. Very good question. Well, a few years ago, after finishing my second feature film, a film called Of Mind and Music, about Alzheimer's and its connection with music, I was introduced to one of the executive producers on this film, Ken Whitney. And when I first met him, I told him, I said, one thing I want you to know about me is that any project that I take on, I hope will in one way or another, in some form, leave a legacy, for mankind, for lack of a better phrase, I guess. And we had a great conversation. And he said, well, Richie, one story that I'd like to tell at some point is something that speaks to my wife's family's experience in being incarcerated. His during the time of Japanese American internment. His wife, Liz Kubota Whitney, is Japanese American, and his two daughters, one of which is the star of the film opposite George Takei, Rachel Whitney, are half Japanese American. And so at the time I was developing a feature film with him about Charles Dickens and what inspired Charles Dickens to write A Christmas Carol based on his first trip to the United States back in 1842. And we learned about a year and a half into that process that another film was getting developed, not the exact same story, but close enough, called The Man Who Invented Christmas, that we were going to put that project on hold. And I remember what Ken had told me. And one night, which, I guess just being a creative person, sometimes this probably happens to a lot of people, but one night I basically woke up and thought of an idea for a short film where there was an elderly gentleman who worked at a museum. At the time, I had no idea the Japanese American National Museum, existed in Los Angeles. In fact, I think I had fictionally kind of had it taking place in San Francisco because I had lived there and I just for some reason saw it taking place there. But and it was basically about a younger person coming to the museum, and she shows an image to this elderly gentleman who was a veteran that kind of triggered memories that he would have had during his time of internment and later fighting for the 442 and World War II. And the idea in its kind of shell came to me that night, and I called Ken the next morning and I said, hey, I have an idea for this. Would you have an interest in getting behind that? And he said, I like the idea. Why don't you write it? So literally, I think that day, that was on a Saturday or the next day on a Sunday, I kind of wrote down in Microsoft Word. I didn't even go to final draft for the script portion. I just kind of started making some rough sketches on how it would go. And before I knew it, I was knocking out some dialogue and different things like this. So I sent it to him, and he said, I like it. And I said, well, I'd like to go to George Takei with it. And he said, well, I told you my family's connection with George, right? And I said, no, which was amazing, because everyone knows in Hollywood that the toughest thing is to get to the actors, get to the talent. But he said my wife's mother grew up working for George's father in the same internment camp, Rohrer Camp in Arkansas. Her father, or George's father, was a block manager in Rohrer Camp, and Liz's mother worked as a typist for George's father. And George, so long story short, they said we actually just met George in New York, I think a year prior, at his Broadway show Allegiance. And Liz used to be an actress, so she called an actor friend, and we got my kind of my version of the script, essentially exactly what it was in that Microsoft Word form, to George. And I think the next day or a day or two later, I got a warm email from George saying, Richie, I can't tell you how much your project means to me. He said, it's haunting me every day. He said, this is a very important story. He was actually, I think, one of the founding members of the Japanese American National Museum, and he had worked alongside a lot of veterans in its capacity, and he said, there's not many left. So he said, what's the next step? And I said, well, now that you want to do it, I think we're going to make a film. So that's how it came about. Hopefully that answers the question.
It's a fantastic story. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one question from the audience, if anyone has a question they want to ask. Don't be shy.
This one right there. It's an easy one. Is that available on DVD?
Could you hear the question, or should I repeat
Yes,
it?
I did, and it is not yet available on DVD, but it certainly will be available streaming, and I'm sure we will have it available on DVD. We are doing a limited theatrical 1-week screening in Los Angeles in June of this year, June 8th. So if anyone's in Los Angeles or wants to spread the word, please send an email to Kenji, and I'm sure he can forward that along to me. If you have an interest in attending, or have a relative or family member or friend who you think would enjoy the film, and George will actually be at that screening. After that point, after that 1 week, we'll probably make it available on Amazon and DVD.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep.
Do we have time for one more? Are we out of time? I think we're out of time. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure. To discuss with you.